Okay, so I want to go back a little bit and discuss what is Tantra again, from another point of view. You know, because we were talking about it a long time. I have defined, but here's another go, another thing to consider. Scholars of the topic actually don't usually offer a definition. Or you could say sort of magic is like that. Kind of people always say, oh, what is magic? And they think they've got this nice, neat definition from someone or other, but it maybe doesn't cover all the bases, or it doesn't quite say what it is. I think with Tantra is a bit like defining magic, defining Tantra, same sort of thing, even though it's quite mainstream in some ways. The best that most people do, and I've seen this a few times now in even in quite technical studies, is to talk about some of the things they do, some of the features of it. Some of which are a little bit unique, as we're going to see, and some of it are not so unique. And you'd say, "Oh, an old hat," that sort of thing, you know, like mandalas or something. There's a mystical diagram. Oh, yeah, you know, everybody's got those. So you could say it shares some things, but maybe getting them all of these things or a certain percentage of these different features together, then you say, oh, well, that is definitely looking tantric now because they do this, that, and the other. Anyway, so I had one list that I used to use, and I kind of use as a basis for a earlier book I wrote on Tantra Sadhana, tantric practice. But I've recently, in connection with something else, come across another kind of good list, you know, that goes, it was quite meaty, really, by another very clever person, Professor Dominic Goodalls. And he's written this essay on this word I mentioned in one of the other things, ritual syntax, the ritual language, the common language that all these people use. And I'd say that the magical people use as well. So he's writing that they've done a whole book on this ritual syntax, you know, kind of, and he contributes an essay. It's sort of like the essay is almost like a whole book in itself. It's quite something. As I say, you probably wouldn't find a Tantra tends to be very sectarian, organized into different sects, right? So there you go, different groups. Whether you kind of lump them all together as being one thing, that's a moot point in its own way. You could just say there are all these funny little unorthodox sects within India and now across the world, of course. So some will have some of these things not there, or some will emphasize one thing more than another. I think you could also apply this type of reasoning to Egyptian religion as well. It has certain things that it's quite diverse, but also there are certain common areas, right, that kind of define it. So, as a taster, I'm doing a longer study in which I go into all of these different things, but I picked out a couple of poor examples really that kind of illustrate many of the points that I've made earlier. One is a thing called the voodoo doll, or the use of a kind of puppet or doll in the process of magic. Probably not so well known that is a feature of Tantra in India. And it also provides a nice neat link with the Egyptian tradition, because of course this thing, sometimes called the wax image spell, a sort of making of a little wax mannequin, sometimes the sticking of pins in it. It could be made of mud as well, or other substances. The kind of magic connected with that can be for healing, can be for cursing or whatever. That if you like, the locus classicus, the first example of this historically, as it happens, I think I'm right in saying, comes from Egypt itself, so you could say that they invented this technique. They certainly popularized it and made it very famous. And this is a long time ago, I think, in the what they call the first intermediate period in Egypt, when things fell apart, and this was personified as again as this great serpent energy, a female serpent, the mother of all curses, Apophis. And a lot of this magic, including the wax image spell, was created in order to counteract her power, or to control her power in one way or another. And it's interesting to see the iteration of that. I know it's called the voodoo dollars shorthand. I don't really know if it may not even be part of voodoo, but it's just a name that gets given to these things one way or another. But certainly the wax image spell, the spell uses things. We can talk about that in the tantric context. Very interesting. Another, the second one would be a thing called oblation or offerings, but a special type of offerings, very notorious, I suppose you'd say, within Tantra, which is the oblation into the mouth of a corpse. So probably heard about the fact that they do this terrifying ritual with a corpse. One of the details of it is that the oblation, the offering, is made into the mouth of the corpse, which might in some cases lying on its back, in some cases lying face down. Again, these are variations in the rituals. So oblation, and also sometimes the offering is burned in the mouth of the corpse. You might think, given our topic again, what's that got to do with Egypt? Well, funny, you see, you think about it, you see, jump around these things, a bit of lateral thinking. Magic of the corpse, making something useful from a dead body, reanimating it, is quintessential Egyptian magic. And one of the things that people most often know about that magic is that it involves a ritual to do with the mouth, especially opening the mouth with a special instrument, which again is shaped like the constellation Ursa Major. There's the astronomy again, right? Across these different traditions, this kind of adds like structure that looks like a constellation is used to physically open the mouth, and then there's a sort of kit with all these other bits and pieces you have to do to make the offerings into the mouth for the different elements to, in some sense, reanimate the corpse. So there's a direct connection. We're going to go into that a little bit more detail maybe. And the third one, of course, would be the serpent power and the serpent symbolism in both traditions. And hopefully we do that. I just wanted to go through just briefly to mention this Professor Goodall's sort of contents list. So if I say contents list there, so again, if you don't like lists of things, you could skip over that, but I wanted to give some idea of this range of things that you would find. And you might also recognize things that from the Egyptian tradition and from the general universal magical tradition that is part of that. It's not so well known, this technical magical thing. So the list, mantras, of course, again, lots of people have mantras, but they have particular types of mantras using particular pieces of language, semi-vowels, especially semi-vowels. There you go, vowel magic. Particular mantras to do with the heart. Heart, again, symbolism. You think about how this, the heart, how the symbol, I suppose it's obvious, it occurs in both traditions. Then, as I say, there's a shared, what is usually called a shared ritual technology. I've mentioned the oblation, the offerings. The mandala, of course, the mystical diagrams, is the kind of bread and butter of magic one way or another. And Hindu mandala is very, very famous. You could say mandalas, it could be the other way. So mandalas are very ubiquitous within Hinduism because that is the tantric element. It comes from Tantra. They're the ones who first developed this kind of symbolic image magic. Image magic, see, Egyptian. The use of poisonous and shocking substances that supposedly give magical power. Revolting substances that are normally thought to be revolting, horrible, smelly, whatever. Related to that, magical rites that make kind of things that you eat in magic in the form of tablets or pills, pellets of one sort or another. Then you have the use of special metals and substances, maybe the wrapping of things in vegetation, in leaves, and those leaves will be, or herbs will be special in some way. The primary one will be from the kind of tree of life, if you like, the Bodhi tree of knowledge, Bodhi, which is in fact the sacred fig, which coincidentally the Buddha is supposed to have meditated underneath and reached in final enlightenment. Sort of mythical metals like the medicine of metals and the philosopher's stone, they have their equivalent known as the pushpa loha, which is a magical alloy. Loha means metal, pushpa means flower, and nobody knows what it is. Maybe they've either forgotten or it's just like a MacGuffin, as someone said. Then there's the cities and magical powers, but they are graded into three types. Those, and this is odd, and we'll explain this somewhere else: heat, smoke, and flames. Then strange places that they do their rituals, not tombs, not temples as such or monasteries, but things like riverbanks and charnel houses, cremation grounds, and weird locations like that, special places. Cremation ground, of course, Smashana originally would have been a tomb of some sort. Again, India is not noted for its tombs, and that's maybe one of the reasons why we don't see the connection with the Egyptian culture, which is all about a big 50% of it is about tombs. But there are actually many, many thousands of tombs all the way across India that because of religious reforms in the Middle Ages are not used, but they don't put any more bodies in them, but they're there and they're represented symbolically, and often a temple is built over them. Again, the corpse was related, that oblation into the mouth of a corpse is related to the tomb as well. Then you have kind of more taboo things. The trading in human flesh. You say, oh, what a terrible thing, trading in human flesh, selling skulls and bits and pieces of the body, and they're famous for that. And of course, Egyptians, they never do anything like that. Of course not. But as it happens across medieval Europe, people traded in a substance called mamia, which is a processed piece of human flesh that was used as a medicine. So I presume this is also a medicine in Egypt itself. As I mentioned, sectarian locations, the position, the orientation within a ritual. This is a very interesting one. You have to stand in the south if you've got an image, but you're facing the image which is placed in the north. This is astronomical stuff. Ursa Major is the northern constellation. All these things link up. Use of statues and things. One that's not so well understood, participation of virgins. We're not going to discuss this time. Is this issue of what's exactly meant by that? And also the implication that, again, you must, is it women we're talking about, or are we talking about people who have a certain innocence? It's very common within magic to use younger people who are innocent, if you like, not so cynical, more susceptible, as mediums. because they're kind of closer to the spirit world than most of us adults who sort of stiffened up and become adults, if you like. Maybe part of the process of becoming an adult is you close off a lot of these influences. Another one not much explores is the use of mirrors, the magic mirror. Use of mirrors in some sort of divination and trance stuff. This is, again, these are magical techniques. Time of day, this is the astronomy, sort of what you might call twilights, eclipses, midnight, the dark fortnight, all makes sense. Not unique to them, but very distinctive of Tantra to have these sort of maximum darkness. And then symbolism number 8. And you might say, yeah, you see that in other bits of Hinduism occasionally, but where did they get it from? You see, they get it from the magicians. It's often the people from folk magic. Folk magic makes its way into official magic. That's the direction of travel. It always seems to be that way. Things start in folk magical practice and it gets kind of jazzed up and stuck in temples. As I say, we're going to talk about dolls, mantra. Initiation is another thing, and lots of different things meant by that. The use of mudras and shapes, images made with the body that somehow communicate. And we've talked earlier about the kind of goals, if you like, of magic, of Tantra, in terms of becoming a bearer of knowledge, becoming a knowledgeable person, gnosis, to use a modern way of looking at it, and to become somehow the best that you can, become perfected in this incarnation, rather than being rewarded in the next. Anyway, I think that's the entire list. So earlier I gave this long list of features of that we might connect with Tantra, and one of the things I do in the big book when it eventually appears, the Egyptian Tantra being the kind of or Egypt and Tantra being a sort of provisional title for now. I can't work out how to do it. So that's coming, and the large part of it will be to expand that list and show the connections and give examples from both traditions, and to give practical things that you can actually do. Most of my books in this thing, they always have some ritual material or stuff that is the basis of it, that can be made the basis of a ritual, which is how we do it when we get a chance to do the workshop. We use some of these things and develop them as a workshop to pass the tradition. And so every book has some ritual in it or something that can be made into a ritual, and often these are rituals material that is not that well known in any of these traditions, one way or another, because that makes it worthwhile in a book as well to put something in there that's not that familiar, but it might not be that familiar. But as in the case of, say, the Star Maps book, which has just come out, it has a ritual that is probably not very familiar, but it's completely crucial. It's like one of the best ritual things that you could find within the Egyptian tradition, and actually the ritual that you really are hunting for within that tradition. And it's been hiding there in plain sight for many thousands of years. But so there you go. It's worth buying Star Maps books just for that, I would say, in all modesty, because it's rather wonderful. So we're going back to early Tantra. So there's this thing called early Tantra, which we know we've got a fair number of these kind of texts now from Tantra, but you think about it, we're really nice to know what they first said, when they first putting their tradition together. What are they really getting at? And this is a growing area of research now for the kind of mainstream stuff is looking at early tantra. What happened when it got going? So you've got this early text or group of texts that has been discovered in libraries and quite hard work. All these clever people have managed to translate it, called the Nishvaasa Corpus, right? Which is recognized as the oldest surviving scripture of tantric Shaivism, i.e., the sort of Shiva type tradition. The thing I spotted from this was that the term Nishvaasa really means breathing. So there you go, opening the mouth for breathing. It's all about breathing. Nishvaasa means a bit more than breathing. This is a key within both traditions, as it happens. But really, it's more like a bit more, you say, labored or really heavy breathing. It's a kind of very heavy form of breathing. And of course, the folklore is that heavy breathing, that is connected with sexuality. So not to miss it out, there's always it's all about the body and sex and reproduction anyway, one way or another. So it's all there. It's just not quite as simplified as you would get in, say, sport yoga, in hatha yoga, or in the kind of things that only focus on certain types of sexuality. It's not the only thing there is. It's all very integrated. According to the Indian medical system known as Ayurveda, which literally means the science of longevity, of how to live long enough to get to understand all of this stuff, which is the core thing about medicine and magic. Why they go together? Ayurveda is actually, you would say, tantric. It starts as tantric medicine. It's the tantrics who developed the medical system, or certainly there's a phase. Medicine in India the earliest things seem to be Buddhist. That when I say, obviously there's medicine before that, but what you call Ayurveda has a particular moment in time, and that's usually linked with the rise of Buddhism. And you need to get some good dates for these sort of things. There is a sort of chronology to all of this, but it doesn't stay within the Buddhist realm. Buddhism, of course, very related, has their own tantric tradition, is very related to Tantra one another. What I'm getting around to saying that within Ayurveda, they also talk about Nishvaasa. And Nishvaasa is a special type of breathing, disruptive breathing, coincidentally, that is sexual, but also is related to being bitten by a snake. So there you go. Snake imagery is coming back in. We talked about Patanjali and his snaky form. And now we're talking about the name of a body of work that is related to this type of breathing that occurs, serpentine breathing, one way or another. Again, as I say, from an Egyptian point of view, breathing is very, very core part of the magical religion. I say numerous passages in early Tantra certainly do talk about Kundalini as a goddess of language. So it's related to sounds and language, to the sort of phonetic, the way that language manifests. But this is still one of the most mysterious things, why the serpent goddess Kundalini should be related to actual language itself, the sound. But then language is kind of pointing out it is a very magical thing in all these different traditions. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the composition of the text itself, which is kind of a bit of a nerdy bit. But again, there'll be a chapter break there, so you skip to the next section if you don't like nerdy stuff about the history. It was composed 450 to 550 of the Common Era, as we said. So right at the beginning of the what they call the tantric period, one way or another. The text is like with all these things, and it's never straightforward, right? It's not written all at once, so that's why you have this sort of spread of dates. Sort of people maybe didn't think it was that important, or so who knows? It was in development, so it doesn't get a sort of an announcement. Oh, we've written this book. So there's in different layers. The earliest layer, known as the Mula Sutra. So there's that word again, sutras, which is always very distinctive of a kind of technical summary, like bullet points, really. Sutras are like the ancient equivalent of bullet points. Mula means the root, like in the Muladhara, the root chakra, Mula. So this is the root things. And that is probably the earliest bit. It marks a transition from earlier tradition, Atimarg, like we mentioned, the Pashupatas are a bit more orthodox. This is a transitional thing to a path that is specifically initially called Mantra Marga, the way of the mantra, the way of sound and the voice and the magical word, one or another, which is much closer to the tantric path. So it's much more archaic, old, very old ideas, and rather than what you might call so we've got early tantra, and then you've got a thing you could say classical tantra, when it's really gets going, and you've got all the kind of whatsoever. But in some ways, I think the early tantra it's more interesting in a way. It's closer to the folk. It hasn't been worked over by a lot of intellectuals, although they're obviously quite clever, but the ones who kind of have to lay down the law or in some ways kill it off. And that happens a bit later, a few centuries later. In fact, you get the kind of golden, the classical tantras. They date it. You can never be sure on the dating of this text, even we're saying all this. They do it on the basis of these clever people I've already mentioned, by looking at certain features in the text. So it's never certain, right? Sometimes these texts do actually have a date in them, but rarely do they have a date. It's always relative to some other moment. So it's a question of comparing ideas and trying to construct a chronology, if you like, a relative chronology, a strata of ideas. Very familiar. Egypt also works on this sort of basis, really. Okay, so I'm going to end that bit. That's the technical bit about the text, which has been translated, but it's very, very difficult to get hold of even the translation. You get studies of it and stuff. In my own library, there's only one copy of this book, probably expensive. If one way or another. So I said I'd pick out one or two topics then at this stage to go into in a little more detail from that long list. So one of them is what I call the voodoo doll, or an image I put on there of the wax image. It's the Indian version of what we would call from earlier times the wax image spell, the making of an image of something, sticking in pins in it. Usually wax is particularly useful and used in the Egyptian tradition, who, as I say, invented this thing, because at the end of the ritual it can be melted down and there's nothing left for any remnants of the ritual to latch onto. That's why they prefer wax. But having said that, the samples that you find in museums are not made of wax, that they're made of clay, just mud, basically dried mud. As I say, voodoo doll is a misnomer. Not even sure there is such a thing within what they call voodoo, the homeland of voodoo, whether that's Haiti or in Africa itself. But the use of mannequins, Egyptian shawaptis, puppets, the wax image spells, these were very, very common in Egypt, as I say, and started as a way of countering the chaotic serpent. There's the serpent again, Apophis, or Apep. And on the screen there's the famous examples of these. I think I've got an example from the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. Probably keep it in a drawer in the museum, but I think you could open it up and have a look. And there's this great big wax image with pins still in it and all the rest. The one they've got there is actually from Malaysia. So this magic is known all over the Far East as well. It's spread there. And interestingly, in modern witchcraft, in the Witchcraft Museum in Boscastle, I think the things are now, or certainly the Gerald Gardner's Witchcraft Museum, he had an example of a wax image spell that is on display, and it looks pretty much like the one in the Pitt Rivers, which makes me think that that also comes from Malaysia, which makes sense that Gerald Gardner, who collected these sort of things, was from there. So it's not actually local. It might not, they make, because it's in Cornwall and everything, and I want to say it's all Cornish witchcraft. You can make you assume that image was made locally somewhere in Cornwall or Devon, but it wasn't, I don't think. I think it's been imported from Malaysia by Gerald Gardner or someone else, right? Probably, if you go to these places, you can buy all sorts of stuff. Whatever, the doll ritual is a kind of, emblematic, really, of the whole tradition. And what I wanted to say, obviously, this figures in the tantric text. There's a description of these of the use of these doll rituals, which I'm going to read to you in a second. I wanted to show you first the picture from the 64 Yogini shrine. So big subject, the yoginis, the 64 yoginis, these kind of witch-like figures within, which are definitely. So this is essentially is a tantric shrine. Whether you will call it a temple, it's very remote in Khajuraho, which is famous for its erotic carvings, of course, thought of as a tantric city that was managed to survive this long. And these other types of, what would you call them, circle chakras, really, these open air sites that are often very remote. Even their existence wasn't that well known until maybe 50 years ago. It was quite a sort of well kept secret that there were these other shrines. And there is one outside the city of Khajuraho, which I was lucky enough to visit. And one of the things I spotted, as you can see from the picture, there are all these offerings, these sort of, I don't know, bowls, ceramic bowls about the size of a human head with something in it. And they've been making, and obviously more there than when I visited, right? So I think the place has actually got more popular now than it was. When I went, there were just a couple of them. And in the shrine would be an image of the yogini, which are, again, very taboo images, right? Even by Indian standards. My belief is, knowing something about the medical tradition and the way these things work, is that I think those are symbolic either of the whole body or specifically of the head, because there's several different elements that have been brought together, including this vegetation, which I think is going to be vetiver, sometimes a little flag, as you would find in the Egyptian hieroglyphs, representing the kind of life force, I think, and then other bits of substances, seeds and whatever that. And this has been left as an offering for the yogini, and the yoginis are very, very fond of severed heads as a offering, amongst other things. So I think it's an obvious link, but in some ways it also connects us with the idea of a kind of symbolic body, a voodoo doll. These are like a kind of paquette, if you like, you might find in voodoo. These pots of grass and other objects, symbolic bodies or heads. Amazing image that to me. All right, it doesn't look like classical architecture. It looks a bit rough and ready, but in a way it's more used, isn't it? You know, in its own way. There hasn't been a lot of money gone into the making of that shrine. It's been a kind of local effort, one way or another. Okay, so going back to the Nishvaasa Tantra and the making of the voodoo doll, or of the magical puppet. It says it's made with a substance called vetiver, which grows all over India. And this is used to make these magical doll rite within early Tantra. A sort of spell that seems to be common across all sorts of magical traditions, from Egypt to witchcraft to modern magical traditions. What's unclear from the experts don't know, right? From looking at the texts, you don't know whether they're being used to protect the practitioner from some magical force, or to charm them in some way. There's also an idea that this is a kind of you start off with a kind of simple version of a spell, because they work in spells now. We're talking about spell magic. If that doesn't work, and see, they might use the term mantra. When they talk about a mantra, they're talking about a kind of magical spell, really. So they'll say if the mantra doesn't work, so you get given this powerful mantra to do something, then you use this bit of magic to sort it out, one way or other. If it's failed, or if it's been defeated in some way, then the wax image spell, the doll spell, is the next step. And the way spells are broken within Tantra is pretty much the same as it might be within the Egyptian tradition. You take the word and you break it in some way, or you take the magical object and you break it in some way. You take the letters out, or you mutilate them in some way so that it's broken. So someone's done that to your mantra, they've disrupted it, they've broken it. Now you go to a bit more funky magic to deal with that. It says, so that the actual wording is when a mantra spell does not work, right? So you know it's been broken because it hasn't worked. The wise man should discern the obstacle, find out what's the problem, and the remedies will be things like bathing, inflaming, cutting, awakening, purifying, and lighting up. Okay, so some of these you do to yourself, and some of these involves, I think it's the process of making the doll, really. You bathe it, you give it life, you inflame it, you maybe cut it, you stick things into it, you awaken it in some way. As you would a real corpse, you might wake it up, you purify it, and then you light it up. We talked about oblation into the mouth of the corpse, where you might actually light it up, you might set it alight. Another quote, we shall see below, there appears to be remedies used first upon a doll of vetiver. This is a comment from the translator. And the following lines to the mantras. It is conceivable, therefore, that the doll represents the practitioner who needs to be protected by something before the mantras are treated with the other processes. So he needs protection before he can do the mantras. And it's also possible that the mantra doesn't give the results, it fails, but is then reinstalled or represented by the doll, put into the doll, and given life. And that's all the remedies are to be applied to the mantra. So those things like cutting and inflaming and everything, you do it by doing it to the doll, and that fixes the mantra. It occurs in Buddhist texts, apparently. There are versions of use of the doll of vetiver, which is bathed in order to nourish all the mantras that it contains, and after that, in order to restore the mantra that has been, in their case, pierced, they call it, i.e. immobilized or damaged in some way by another practitioner, or just by messing it up in the process. One desirous of nourishing all the mantras should conserve, and this is your taboo, revolting substances now, should consume cow's urine and barley gruel. Sounds great. And should make an image of vetiver, venerate it with white flowers, and oblate it with milk 108 times. I bathe it in milk, and then you should offer incense over it, and a particular mantra, which I won't go into now, which is to be recited 108 times. Then after reciting that, I say one's own protection is then you're protected. And if you recite it twice, then that protects another person. And 3 times to protect the substance that you need to protect. And if you want to nourish your mantras, to give them that have been damaged or messed up in some ways, cut, broken, destroyed, then again, you make this image of the vetiver, venerate it, say the mantra, another mantra, more repetitions, 1,008 times. Make a fire of mustard seeds smeared with curds, honey, and ghee, and this will fix it. It'll unpierce your mantra. This is folk magic, isn't it? You know, you can find versions of this all over the world. This is why we talk about the ritual syntax, language is so similar. Maybe it's human nature, that it frees other beings' mantras as well, which have been cut or broken or hammered down or terrified. In other words, they've been bound. This unbinds them with this image as say vetiver as a substance. It's very interesting stuff. Bathe it with fragrant water over and over. Maybe repeat it a number of times, and everything will be okay. Apparently, even there's an older text. I say we talk about how some of these ideas do have an earlier version, as in the Atharva Veda. There are 4 principal Vedas that those 7 sages I told you about kind of wrote. So the 4 Vedas is like that fourfold bit of the Ursa Major image. That's another issue, but it has a nice connection. And they also talk about using a doll or a puppet as a nourishing rite. But it's unclear from that. They make theirs out of flour as well, at a particular time of year. It's unclear what they do with that. No, the ritual doesn't say. It talks about making it, but so it might be for another type of ritual, but it's certainly noticeable that they are even as old as the Vedas, which is the oldest strata of religious texts in India. They talk about making these things. So that's the voodoo doll. In summary, probably a magic that we all know.